The technology in this film is stupid. Like their
Uh,
spaceships, they go from regular army aircraft carriers to
yes,
this tech that can like it's absurd.
that can like go into like anti-gravity
Yeah, it
areas,
has all
and
this like force field stuff. It doesn't make any sense. This movie opens up with Kong on the Skull Island, and we find out he's been encapsulated in this Monarch dome,
containment
containment dome.
area
And I'm just
that
like,
looks like Skull Island.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's like they use this.
and it's on Skull
It's
Island.
on Skull Island. It's like I don't understand the purpose of that, and we'll get into that when I rewrite the film because I don't think they needed that whatsoever. The humans in this movie, I think, are worse than King of the Monsters.
Yes.
Madison Russell, I can't stand her. They introduce Brian Tyree Henry. He's Bernie, but he's just a knockoff Bryan Cranston. He's the exact same character. He's a theorist who lost somebody,
Yes.
but we didn't see him lose anybody, so we have none of that. That's just spoken through dialogue that he had a person named Sarah who was his love. We didn't have that, like, he's just a remake of Bryan Cranston because we saw the devastation that Bryan Cranston lost. We understood his reasoning. We don't understand his reasoning for all this. He's just a guy who podcasts about, like, he's like in the know.
Right. It almost feels like I think they did him a little dirty in the fact that he is this like conspiracy theorist with like a tragic loss, but he's like comedy relief.
Yeah.
Make him a Bryan Cranston 2.0. Like give him a.
But I don't think you needed that whole those three characters.
I don't think so either.
Julian Dennison. I cannot stand this actor. After seeing Deadpool 2, I could not stand his character, and when they announced him for this movie, I was like, I already can't. I was already going into this movie like I can't stand him as an actor, and as like I don't know him as a person, but what I've seen him play in movies, I can't stand the way his characters are. And in this one, it's the same way. He's just the dumb sidekick that Millie Bobby Brown pushes around because she's a real B in this movie.
Yeah.
And those three characters are just used to conveniently follow the plot to wherever the plot needed to go.
Right. I feel like if humans are a pawn in like the story and they have to follow, they're not compelling.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't like bumbling characters.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any good for anybody.
And all of them were. They're just preventing the story from actually moving. And so I'm not going to really talk about them too much because I don't think they're needed at all. But the one character who I think steals this movie is an actress called Kaylee Hoddle, and she plays Gia.
Yes.
She is the most interesting character in this film.
Yes.
And what I think...
she signs everything.
Yeah, what I think is a problem, and the director said that this movie had 5 hours of footage, and they cut it down to this hour and 45. They spent so much of this movie expediting scenes with dialogue instead of showing us what actually happened. Like her whole Gia's backstory was explained to us with Rebecca Hall's Eileen Andrews' character talking to Alexander Skarsgård's character, Dr. Nathan Lind. Her family got, wiped out by the storm, and then I chose at that moment to make an oath to protect her. And everything is said through dialogue instead of visually showing us.
Just show me. Show me.
Talking.
Yep.
That's the problem with this movie. Too many characters talk too much instead of showing us stuff.
And they're all like relatively like big name actors.
Yeah.
All unfortunately like having to vie for screen time.
Yeah.
We don't need that many
Again, there's too many characters. That's said with the villains. The villains are so useless in this film. Because the King of the Monsters villain, sorry, what's his name again? The actor?
Charles Dance.
Charles Dance. He's not in this film. Why?
Yeah, he's not there at all.
This other new guy, Walter Simmons, who's the head of Apex, this other new facility that came out of nowhere, he's the villain. And he doesn't do anything other than have this facility. And who has his henchman, who they just gloss over, is Ren Serizawa's son, or that's his name, Ren Serizawa.
Yeah, he's Dr.
Serizawa's son, but they gloss that over.
I didn't. Yeah, I looking at the cast was the first time I noticed who that was.
Yeah,
yeah. I feel like Walter Simmons as like the villain. I'll say it now. Who makes Mechagodzilla? Like we need a villain. We need a villain to make Mechagodzilla. It's kind of he's kind of there. He needs to be there.
But in my thoughts. You're calling this movie Godzilla versus Kong.
Right.
And the whole movie, Kong is not... They want you to feel like he's a main character to Godzilla. Like, Godzilla is clearly made out to be the villain in this movie. Yeah. And I don't think they should have put Mechagodzilla in this at all.
What do you think would have been better?
Just focus on... We'll get to it in a rewrite, but the whole movie should focus on Godzilla versus Kong.
Right.
Like, Mechagodzilla should not have been in this movie. If anything, he should be the next one or they go about it in a different way. I don't think he should have been in the film. As great of a scene as it was, it didn't, the plot of this doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to hop to the end because they need an
Yeah.
energy source to fuel Mechagodzilla because he can't stay powered up for too long.
Right.
And they're using Ghidorah's skull as like a cybernetic link, a psychic link, because
Yeah.
they tell us that Ghidorah can talk telepathically because his necks
Yeah.
are so long to connect Mechagodzilla to the host, who is Ren Sarazawa, who's sitting in this skull, manning
Yeah.
this thing from far away. But what I don't understand is where did they get the second skull from to be able to connect to Mechagodzilla? Because there was only one head.
Right.
There was only one
It's
head.
right. And to me, yeah, you're right. It's like, oh, there was another one in Mechagodzilla
Yeah.
to make that connection.
Unless they used the brain, but I doubt that because they were funneling from the skull bones, like the DNA of the
Right.
skull. But then the other thing is, we're just gonna get this out of the way so we can start from fresh and redo this whole movie.
Yeah.
When they're in Middle Earth with Kong, and the useless Apex soldiers take a sample, and they USB Bluetooth this sample to Apex thousands of miles up to Tokyo, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we just need the sample of the thing." That makes absolutely no sense. You
Yeah.
need a
I don't.
physical energy source to put into Mechagodzilla. You can't just Bluetooth their thing and they're
Right.
like, oh, they're replicating the sample. It's okay. I get they can scan it and replicate it, but you have to have a physical power source in order to put that into him in order to run. You can't just be like, oh, yeah, we're replicating it and now he works.
Right. Yeah, they didn't really go through like the logistics of any of that.
They
It's like,
didn't know.
wait, how does this work? How does this science work? Like, how does this tech work?
Yeah, which is
It's like,
why they
yeah,
shouldn't have Mechagodzilla because the tech they cannot explain. Because this goes
right.
into the part where after he gets the power source, Mechagodzilla becomes sentient, which is a cool scene because you can see in the background he's like turning his
Yeah,
head,
he turns
and
over, yeah,
Sarazawa gets like shocked. But I think what they wanted to happen was have Ghidorah take over Ren's mind, but they
yeah,
didn't show that because they clearly had to cut for time. But when Mechagodzilla's fighting Godzilla and Kong, he is fully sentient.
yeah,
And when they cut back to the trio of Millie Bobby Brown, Brian Tyree, because they're in Japan now, they found a way
yeah,
to make it there.
yeah,
Plot: they dump water on the control panel, and it causes Mechagodzilla to like malfunction for a second.
right.
Makes
Just like
no
a split
sense.
second.
Makes
I
no
know.
sense because he's sentient. He's not controlled by their power source anymore.
Right.
Also, the water wouldn't have affected him. It wouldn't have affected the computer that fast. It was barely any
I
water.
know.
They
Right.
could have cut all that out and just cut to Godzilla earlier of him blasting Kong's as he's holding the tail of Mechagodzilla with the axe. They
Yep.
could have cut to it earlier of Godzilla blasting the axe and then gone it. You don't need the humans to save them.
Right.
This whole movie was the humans saving Kong every time.
Yes.
They make
And
Kong look like such a fool this whole movie.
they do, and I think it's so interesting going from Godzilla 2014, where the humans are doing things obviously in response to Godzilla fighting the Mutos. Now this one, it's all like the monsters are incompetent on their own
Yeah.
without the humans. It's like, are you kidding? No, they're not.
This movie is titled Godzilla vs. Kong. Rebecca Hall's character, she said Godzilla will come for him. If Godzilla was going to come for him because they have this ancient rivalry, which they never showed because they just needed to use dialogue to say it,
They
what was he
literally
doing
had
the
one
last
thing at the
5
beginning.
years?
Exactly. What is so special about Kong or Skull Island that keeps him like off of Godzilla's radar?
Yeah,
I don't get it.
I don't either.
I didn't. I never understood that.
so in about 5 minutes when we start redoing this movie, we're going to go from the top and I'll have my notes and we can kind of go from there. But this movie, listen, the fight on the water is so cool. But again,
It is.
the humans are saving him. Kong lost immediately. He had no chance.
Yeah.
And then when they go to Middle Earth, he would have lost to the Warbats again. It's like, how many times do the humans have to save Kong? It's like, I don't believe Kong could ever beat Godzilla.
Right.
In
Based
general,
on all of this.
not even based on it. He has no chance ever.
Right.
Even before this
Right.
movie came out, I'm like, he's not going to win.
Yeah.
But you've already set up that Kong can't do anything by himself.
That's what I mean. Yeah. They're literally telegraphing to us in every instance that Kong is not capable of defeating Godzilla.
Because he can't beat lesser monsters
Exactly.
without humans' aid.
Yep.
Because that thing was going to choke him out before the humans
Yep.
blasted it, and then he ripped it apart, whatever. Then he found the axe. But then it's like, yeah, the final fight in Hong Kong, it was really those two pitted against each other. He had no help, really, other than the axe.
Right.
That was the best part of the movie. And
It
then
was.
you got into the whole, like, making Godzilla making Kong submit
Yep.
But then at that point, when he does that, it's almost like, okay, Godzilla's done with him. He's looking for the real problem. Kong is just
Right.
something in his way. That's basically what this
Yeah.
whole movie's been.
And it's so interesting because it's like, who is the main monster in this movie?
Yeah.
Like,
They want
because
it to
we're
be
focused,
Kong because he's
right?
the good
Because
guy.
all the story beats are on him,
Yeah.
but now it's like, oh, Godzilla has his sights on the real bad guy. So is Godzilla the main monster, like
Yeah.
main character? I don't know. Like, I
But
don't.
Mecha Godzilla has been haunting this whole movie as the main villain. Where
Right.
Godzilla's just smacking Kong around. They considered round two goes to Kong because
Yeah.
after they did the whole atomic breath and axe
Powering up the
collision,
axe.
Godzilla was like
Yeah.
on the ground. He didn't really. I wouldn't say that's round two because they were both knocked back and Kong's there. But
Yeah.
after they fight in round three ends so fast because Godzilla's like, I'm so sick and tired of you.
Yep.
He knocks him aside, steps on his chest, crushes his
He's
chest or
he
whatever.
probably broke some
He
ribs.
broke some
Yeah.
ribs or whatever. Gives him a nod, saying, "Okay, you submit to me. Now I'm done with you. I'm trying to find what's causing me to lose control of this whole movie."
Right.
I think we should go into recrafting this movie in order to set up Godzilla and Kong to be the
Yeah.
final film.
Yep.
So, if I may start with my notes,
Go for it.
we're opening the movie with a flashback to the Primal War. The
Okay.
war
Good.
they've been talking about for 2 movies. This opening scene is going to cost $60 million.
Yeah.
This whole movie, this opening portion of this movie, there's gonna be no humans whatsoever.
Budget is no
Budget is
object
I'm not.
for
This movie's gonna
Brian.
cost $250 million. This is I'm listen. If you're gonna make Godzilla vs Kong, I'm making it the best it can be.
Yeah.
So we're flashed back to the Primal War. We're in where Kong is in his youngest state because in Skull Island he's like a teenager a bit. He's a child,
Mhm.
and it's in his perspective. We're witnessing his species defending Middle Earth, their sanction, like their throne. You know, the throne room in Godzilla vs Kong.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're witnessing them defending the throne against the skull crawlers and other monsters
Yeah.
that's happening. We're witnessing this, the war bats and all that other stuff. We witness Kong's parents. We see Kong's parents, so we have that like. Where I'm basically going in with like a Kung Fu Panda 2 backstory.
Okay.
This is Poe
Yeah.
is haunted by something, and his parents were killed by something he doesn't know. But it's constantly throughout this movie. We'll get flashbacks to what's causing him having this issue that he's having. The parents are telling him to run and all this other stuff. And at that point, we see them do all the signing. So we set
Yeah.
up right away that Kong knows how to sign. And there's a language
Okay.
barrier there. So it's not a surprise later on. And they tell him to run. One by one, like the species are getting overrun. And they place Kong in the throne room. And his father closes the doors. That's
Yeah.
when you see him close the doors and you get that handprint on the door you see in. So you get the
Yeah.
origin of that. It's like, it's just a subtle detail, whatever. And
Yeah.
before the doors close, you see a beam of blue light and you
Okay.
hear a massive roar, and it's Godzilla's roar. But before
Right.
the doors close, you see this blue light and whatever. So that's the opening flashback. And then it cuts to Kong waking up from a nightmare. In this nightmare, he wakes up. In the real world, we're back in 2019. And it's Ghidorah's
Okay.
roar. So we're on Skull Island, and he wakes up from this massive cry. At this point, we're getting rid of the bubble dome that they did to him in Godzilla vs. Kong.
Yeah.
It's an open island. So at this point,
Yeah.
Ghidorah's roars has launched, and all of a sudden Skull Island starts erupting, and all these monsters start coming up from the depths, and G is there, and all the tribe people. Monarch's there, but they're
Uh-huh.
not enclosed, whatever. At this point, we get to see Kong protecting his island, right? We see him
Okay.
being a beast. The reason why
Yeah.
he is the king of this island, and he's not really. It's like kind of like Mothra doesn't pay attention to Ghidorah. Kong is his own apex, like alpha male, and he is
Right.
protecting this island. These monsters are going crazy. Skull crawlers are coming up. You get war bats and all these other things, and he's protecting the people of this island. So you get a lot of good shots of him being the protector. He knows where the people are, so he's kind of around trying to prevent that from happening. But she is the one he saves. He
Good.
sees Gia, picks her up. He signs to her. Then, are you okay? Like we already
Okay.
have this like connection to he can talk to the people. And then so he picks up Gia. They head to the middle of the forest. So like to bring her to safety, he tries to like hide away in like his throne cave, wherever he wants to go in the forest. And at that point, then we'll cut to the point where Godzilla defeats Ghidorah
Okay.
in the very end of the movie, and Godzilla roars, and he becomes the alpha male. And so that echoes kind of like Zack Snyder's Justice League, where Superman's cry echoes across the world. So
Okay,
it's like
yeah,
Ghidorah's
yeah,
cry echoing, Godzilla's cry echoing, and it cuts back to Skull Island, and all the monsters stop, and it cuts to Kong,
yeah,
and he hasn't heard this roar since like his nightmares, and he immediately
yeah.
has like this look on his face, and then he roars back, and that's when we cut to Godzilla versus Kong, the title card. So right then and
Cool.
there, it sets up this mystery of like, we know Godzilla was in Middle Earth fighting them, but we don't see him yet. And so we get this slow
Yeah.
reveal of like Godzilla's the one that's been slowly taking his species out. I
Yeah.
also forgot to mention when end of King of the Monsters, they've already set up that there's a Middle Earth below Skull Island. So I
Yes.
don't know why they had to go to Antarctica to do that. Skull Island is where this movie is going to take place. Going forward into, we're going to go 2 weeks later. We're not going to jump in 5 years. This is immediate.
Yeah.
Godzilla's home is destroyed. He's the head. He's the king of the monsters. He needs a
Yeah.
home. He needs a place to go. So we'll go 2 weeks later, and we'll open. I wanted to open on Ren Serizawa because I think he needs to be more of a character. We'll set up. He's a scientist. He's not just some dude in a cloak. He is torn between believing that his father sacrificed himself and Godzilla killing him. So
Okay. Yeah.
he's at this crossroads where it's like his father believed in the protection of these creatures, but then he's also like, my father died to these creatures like that he tried to protect. And
Right.
at that point, we get introduced to the villain again from the second movie,
Yeah.
Charles
Charles
Dance,
Dance.
and
Okay.
he manipulates Ren into thinking like the villain side, like he's definitely the one, and we need to defend ourselves against these creatures. So we need to do something to do this because they have the head of Ghidorah, and we're
Yep.
going to utilize the skull, the bones they found in 2014
In that
in that cave,
cave.
the bones of
Yes.
Dagon. We're going to utilize those two things for
Yep.
Godzilla and Kong. This is just going to set up this
Right.
movie. There's not going to be any other
Yep.
villain. But we're going to set up that they set up in King of the Monsters. They're making organic titans, but they need like kind of like they needed the power source for Mechagodzilla. They need some more DNA, like living. They need something living in order to make this work. So that's when
Right.
they introduce us to Alexander Skarsgård's character. That's when they meet up. Instead of having this other Apex guy, they meet up, do the same plot where he goes to find Rebecca Hall's character and they re-up, so they
Mhm.
need to go to Middle Earth kind of thing. And so we have all this set up where they manipulate Alexander's character into taking them to Middle Earth, like infiltrating Monarch into going to Middle Earth to grab some sort of species that lives down there, DNA, in order to have that to weave into Ghidorah's regenerative abilities because they're going to use that, and then the bones of this
Yep.
other creature, like the DNA, to mix them all together. And then I'll let you have thoughts of my opening so far.
Obviously, this is quite a bit different than what already has been established. But I think it actually it's set up like a like a well thought out
Monster movie.
intro, right? Because it's like
Backstory.
right, you have backstory. Why would Kong and Godzilla be fighting? Oh, Godzilla was attacking Kong and his family and species in the Hollow
Yeah.
Earth centuries ago, and it still haunts him now. And now we know where Kong was during the events of
King of
King of the
Monsters, right.
Monsters. Yeah, because it's like, why didn't he fight too?
We know he
Like,
can't
what?
swim.
Right.
There have to have
We
been
get it.
all these
Yeah.
other monsters were rising up from everywhere. Skull Island had to have
Right.
been affected.
Exactly. And
And he's the protector
like,
of the island, so we need to build up him as a character that he can take on
Right.
anything, as well as
Yeah.
like showing him that just like in the other movie, Godzilla vs Kong, the original, where
Yep.
he doesn't need the humans to defend himself.
Right. Right. Again, we're trying to make a compelling standalone monster
Yeah.
here, not like this monster can't handle himself. The humans have to intervene, and that's where again the story was dragging because humans were always intervening at every step of the way. This time, it's like, okay, now we have a competent main monster,
Yeah, and he's been
to go up against another competent main
and he's
monster.
been fighting for decades on Skull Island, so he's like, we see
Right.
him utilize his environment.
Right. Now we have a new contender, well, an old one, Godzilla, coming onto his turf.
Right.
Kong might be a little bit underprepared, but he has like home field
Yeah.
advantage. So he knows how to utilize the space. He knows the limitations of the land. But it could also kind of go into like, we're still kind of rooting for Kong because we know he might have a little bit of a disadvantage because Godzilla is just nuts.
and we're using the
Oh,
flashback
go ahead.
scenes so we don't have to hear the humans talk about this ancient rivalry that's been going
Right.
on, but we don't know why it's been going on. Like, we never saw it. So we're
Right.
using these as a way to get rid of that dialogue altogether.
Yeah. And it's like, good, I do want to know what that ancient rivalry was. But if we are to interact with Hollow Earth as like a primary location, I kind of want to know a little bit more about
Right.
it. If I'm there for 5 seconds, I don't care. Cool. It's built into the world.
Yeah.
It's old. Nobody knows about it. It's just something we deal with now. But they deal with Hollow Earth as this like staple place. We're there for a long time. We should be comfortable with it. We should be, this is why we're here. It actually means something to
Right.
Kong. And not just, he's in the throne room, picks up a random
Yeah.
axe, and okay, powers
Yeah.
up, whatever. So, yeah, that's really good. The idea that Ren Sarazawa is a character,
Yeah.
use Ren Sarazawa as this like conflicted new character, because we lost Ken Watanabe's character in the last one. So it's like, okay, we're still following like the families
Yeah.
that are involved in
Yeah.
this. Yeah, have him grapple with, did my father die protecting Godzilla? Did he die because of him? And then have, whether it's Walter Simmons or Charles Dance, kind of lead him towards him like dying because of Godzilla. And he's like, and push him further and further throughout the movie. And then he's like, oh yeah, that's the last straw.
Yeah.
And then, right. Anyway, continue. I like it so far.
So yeah, we cut to back to Skull Island, and they're getting all these alerts from the news that Godzilla is coming to Skull Island, and they have to prepare. And then at this point, I don't know if you've ever seen, there was a Call of Duty. It was like an event, and they had this cutscene where it was on Skull Island, and Kong is on the top of the mountain, and it cuts to the ocean, and Godzilla's coming. You can see Godzilla coming towards Skull Island. It looks exactly like the movie. The cinematics are crazy, and he's like rising up from the
Whoa.
ocean, and Kong is like beating his chest, and he's like roaring, and he starts running off this mountain towards the ocean, and Godzilla rises
That's
up
cool.
and roars. So I think I want to utilize a little bit of that.
That'd be cool.
But then before we do that, like when Kong sees Godzilla rise up from the ocean, it's like there's another quick like flash back, like another minute scene of like him going back to the primal war of like the devastation that was happening, and like you see a little bit more, and then it cuts back to Kong beating his chest, and then they head towards each other. And so this fight's gonna be bigger than, there's only gonna be 2 fights in this movie.
Okay.
Round 1 and round 2.
I'm very interested to see how you split them up.
Round 1, Kong has the biggest advantage ever because he knows exactly what a Skull Island is. He knows every corner of it, and we're going to see him fight in a way that we didn't see in this movie, where he's going to be throwing boulders. He's going to be using his environment, hiding behind things. He's going to be up close and personal, grappling with him, how we did with all the other monsters we saw back and all the other stuff, and like kind of using that. But Godzilla, he's not wavering in any way. There's a point where Kong realizes he has to retreat. He's not going to submit to Godzilla, but Godzilla's the alpha at this point, and there's this back and forth, and he goes to the entrance point of Middle Earth in Skull Island to retreat. And that's where we get the point where he hasn't been down there since the war, and I think we could utilize a little bit that he goes back there once in a while, but he's afraid to go down there because the skull crawlers are down there, but that's the hole they come up from.
Yes.
And he's going to have, this is the only way for him to escape. It's because he knows what's down there and he needs it, which is the power and the axe.
Yeah.
We're going to get rid of the whole, like, the warpage that happens when they go to Middle Earth. There's like this, like, in Godzilla vs. Kong, where they warp through this, like, black hole thing.
Oh, yeah.
We're just going to do it like how Godzilla burnt a hole through the earth, and it's, like, deep in there. Okay? He's going to go down there. He's going to hide, and Godzilla's like, obviously, he didn't see him go in there, so he doesn't know, and he's just going to do the roar, and he's going to call all the monsters to him to make Monster Island. Skull Island is no more. Monster Island is happening. All the monsters are coming to him. Rodan's coming. All this other stuff. And that's when we see Kong go into Middle Earth, and we'll cut to the humans back and realizing that Godzilla has now taken control of Skull Island, and they have to be careful because they don't want to do anything because they're there. Monarch is set up there, but they're not domed in, kind of thing. Skarsgård comes in and they communicate. We have to go into Middle Earth. He convinces them we have to follow Kong. We have to make sure everything's okay, kind of thing. But he has this, like, he doesn't know Ren's plan and everything. So they have the soldiers that follow them that they need the species from. So
Yep.
that's when we can use the humans kind of to like go into Middle Earth to follow Kong while leaving Godzilla
Yes.
to like
Monitor
monitor
and
his
gatekeep
newfound home
domain.
and waiting for the
Yeah.
other monsters to come. So then the humans go in there. We don't need those hovercraft things. There's no change in
Right.
gravity. They just go down there to find him. And Kong, we find him like passed out. The humans
Sure.
wake him up, kind of thing. And throughout him walking through the Middle Earth, we get more flashbacks of his life in Middle Earth with his
Okay.
family. So we're not showing the fight right now. We're showing like him
Yeah.
living there peacefully. Every time he sees something that he recognizes, we'll get like a mini flashback, kind of like in Kung Fu Panda
Yeah.
2, where he sees something and there's like all these flashbacks, and then the lady's like, let it flow, and he does the chi and he visually sees
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. That only
It's
makes
gonna
sense.
get
Good.
crazy
I'm
from
glad.
here, but just go with me because it's a Godzilla movie and we can do whatever we want because
Yep. Yep.
it's just up in arms. So we get towards the part where he sees the throne room. But meanwhile, all these other like army people are like there. They're following him around, and like they're seeing all these species crawling around. We see different monsters and stuff, and they're collecting samples secretly. But then we see the throne room, and Kong then like he gets up to the door and he sees the handprint, and that's when he opens it up. And when we open up the door, we flash back to the biggest flashback, not the most revealing, but like the biggest one of like where the war began. Like it started, we're like,
Okay. Yeah.
then we visually see how the monsters, like how they started fighting in the first place. So that happens. And then when Kong enters the throne room, then he sees the axe. And when he picks up the axe, we get a scene of them creating these weapons to
Yes.
defend against what's coming. At that point, we see this is where it gets crazy.
Oh
It's
no.
in the art book of Godzilla versus Kong. In
Yeah.
this throne room, there is cave paintings all the way around the top in the art book, and it shows the fight of what's happening. So obviously the people must have painted it, but there's this
Right.
ancient Godzilla figure that's painted in blue that has wings. And it's like this
Oh. Okay.
obviously the most powerful one, and these other Godzillas are fighting the Kongs, and they have the axes in this
Yeah.
thing. We'll use the Space Godzilla in a way to like we'll give it that design, but this is the
Okay.
original Godzilla of Middle Earth.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And what happens at that point, Kong sees the axes lying on the ground, and we do the same thing in Godzilla vs. Kong where he puts it on the ground and it lights up that
Yeah.
Godzilla tail.
That was
And at,
cool. I gotta say that was
and at
neat.
that point, it cuts back to Godzilla on the top, and it's something's happening. He heads towards the Middle Earth entrance. I think we still keep him blasting through the ground. I think that's a really cool part.
Yeah, it
But
was. Yeah.
the Middle Earth portion, the tail lights up, then something happens in Middle Earth where like something is being awakened, and that's
Okay.
when the ancient Godzilla arises from the
Inside Hollow
depths
Earth.
of Middle Earth.
That's cool.
And
Okay.
Godzilla enters there, and it's still keeping the Godzilla versus Kong aspect, but like when Godzilla sees this version, it's like he's almost afraid. It's like
Okay.
these two have been fighting. You might want to change a little bit of this. This is just coming off the dome because I had all these notes and I was like,
Yeah.
how am I going to get to the end? I feel like we should get to the point where Godzilla and Kong are fighting each other before we see the ancient Godzilla, and then it cuts
Yeah.
back that he hasn't awakened yet. But then we
Mhm.
get a Godzilla versus Kong fight in Middle Earth,
Yeah.
axe and all and everything, and that's when the other one rises from the temple that they encaged him in or whatever,
Okay.
and
Okay.
then that's when Kong realizes that's the one he saw, and Godzilla's afraid because this is the one was like the head honcho alpha of like it controls everything,
Yes.
and it's almost like there's a subspecies, but when it sees, oh, it's like How to Train Your Dragon.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
they see
Yeah.
this
Oh, like
gigantic
the
one, they get afraid. The
yes.
most, the
Right.
ancient one, and I think it was movie 2,
Yes, it
and
was.
all the dragons are
Yeah.
like afraid. Toothless is afraid to like, it's slowly like maybe it's like mind mending them. It's like the alpha. It's like the cry.
Well, it's yeah. Exactly. Okay.
And then that's when they have to team up to fight this thing, and then that's when the army men they defeat it in a absurd fashion. They
Yeah.
use that
Yep.
DNA and bring it back up to go on to the next Godzilla and
Right.
Kong now that they're living together on Monster Island, and now they're co-alphas, and they understand that Godzilla wasn't the
Right.
reason why they destroyed his family. Like this thing was the reason why it controlled
Yeah.
everything, all the monsters, to attack because it wanted straight power.
Right. Right. And it's not even so much about being like the alpha. It's about being like the protectors
Yeah.
of Earth.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's both their homes.
Yeah. Where
Right.
this thing is more
Okay.
primal and like I'm in
Yes.
control of everything.
Okay. I like it. I like it. I have a couple of things that we definitely need to address in terms of like the hierarchy of what we've already seen.
Right.
Okay, I'll start. Let's call him Space Godzilla just to make it
Okay.
easy.
I would agree with that because if you think about it, in Hollow Earth, there's a bunch of these like rock formations that look like diamonds and stuff. So he could be the
Right,
formation of the Earth. Like, yeah. So we could have
right.
that going for him.
What if Space Godzilla? How do we convey to the audience and like to everybody what is Space Godzilla like? We have to have a motivation essentially aside from just fear
Yeah.
from Godzilla to show that Godzilla does not like this ancestor or the Space
Right.
Godzilla. My thought, just like off the top of my head, Space Godzilla needs to actually come from space billions of years ago.
Right.
He's essentially the one who created the Hollow Earth based on his like impact.
Gotcha.
From there, his radiation created Godzilla's species. And there could have been potentially, like, Hollow Earth could have been created, but it was also, like, part of Kong's ancestors as well. Like, their land kind of crumbled into Hollow Earth, and now they have, like, Kong's people and Godzilla's people at odds with each other because they're on different levels now.
Right.
There has to be some kind of backstory, but I understand like Godzilla is afraid
Yeah. I mean, this is just
of
me
this.
spewing off notes for 2 hours. Like, if we
Yeah,
had more time, we
yeah.
could easily create a perfect reason why.
Part two.
Because I didn't want to have
Part
Mecha
two.
Godzilla. Like, it just didn't seem.
I'm good
Yeah,
with
I was
that.
just trying to find a way to make the whole story make sense of with the whole ancestor thing and like because Mechagodzilla has no other than like being Ghidorah, it has no reason to be in the movie with Kong. Like Kong has no other than like Gia signing to him saying, "Oh yeah, he's really the bad one," kind of deal, like manipulating to Kong. It's like, "Oh yeah, I
Right,
fought him for no reason." He kind of thing. There
right.
needs to be a connection between the two monsters of why they team up to go
Yes,
into Fourth Godzilla and Kong because that
yes.
needs to be established that they're
Yep.
coexisting now to go into the sequel where the humans really take over because we can't have two movies where the humans are like, yeah, we need to kill him, and the next movie like we need to make something else to kill him. You know what I mean? There needs to be
Right.
the first portion to be organic biological connection
Yep.
from Middle Earth, and the
Yep.
next one needs to be okay. Now that we need to figure out these two need to this monster verse needs to go. Like we can't have these
Right.
monsters around anymore.
Right. Yes. Okay. So I totally agree because yeah, let them resolve their problems without a lot of human intervention. They've become amicable protectors of Earth at the end of this movie. And then Kong and Godzilla, they have to fight. I don't know yet.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what is your thought for a sequel?
Okay, so now that we wrapped, we're going to end the exact same way Godzilla versus Kong ended with Godzilla going off, but he's just going to go back up
Yep.
to Monster Island where all the monsters are now, and he's just going to protect them there, and Kong's going to stay
Yep.
underneath where Monarch's still going to monitor both. It's basically a sanctuary for monsters, and this is their new home, and they don't have to be around the whole entire planet. But the post-credit scene of Godzilla versus Kong is going to be
Yep.
Ren Sarazawa and the bad guy. They're in their science lab and they're cooking up something for the next movie. And we see it's not Mechagodzilla. They're
Okay.
utilizing the bones the Ghidorah had for its ability to regenerate.
Yep.
And they have got a sample from a creature that was below. And they're going to
Uh-huh.
utilize their knowledge of the oxygen destroyer from the second movie, how that thing almost took out Godzilla. And they're going to
Yeah.
make Destroya.
Okay.
Because Destroya in the all other movies was created from the blast, the nuclear blast that they used to kill Godzilla, and it created this like the species down there, the hermit crabs kind of thing. It created that kind of
Yes.
like it kind of devoured everything that oxygen wise. So it's like we're creating that in a more biological way rather than having them sending a nuke down there and blowing it up and it forming. We're creating it ourselves and
Right.
send that upon Middle Earth and Skull Island.
Right. That's pretty cool. And then that's when they team up.
At the end of this, I think Kong needs to make a sacrifice in order for Godzilla to defeat Destroya. But Mothra is going to
Yeah.
be in this movie because it's going to hatch from the egg.
The egg, right. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
So that's my idea for Godzilla and Kong.
I like it because yeah, it felt it. I don't know where it's going to go from here
Yeah.
with the next movie based on what's
Yeah.
already existing.
And like none of the other monsters in Godzilla's verse are like, I mean, I'm sure there's comics that people know about that there's something more powerful,
Yeah,
but like Destroy, in my mind, he's the only one that could be the cap to this series.
right. I do really like that tie-in with the oxygen destroyer.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We're definitely taking our liberties and not worrying about what the studio might
No, they're
say.
definitely not going to let us
Um,
do any of this.